Hey, everybody. Today we are talking about files, mostly as regards to what we as a supervising broker or broker looks for in files. Also, why sometimes you don't get paid for them and sometimes we pay and say, okay, get it back to us kind of thing. Because there are some things that are actually really red flaggy. So when we made up our seller's checklist or buyer's checklist, we did those primarily because there are certain forms that are absolutely required and are auditable, and some that are just make the file more easy to find and information that you need going forward. Some of the things that are missing, I'm going to point out, and I'm going to throw this one under the bus a little bit, mostly because I, as a supervising broker, missed a few things. And that's why it's also important that we trade sometimes so that everybody knows, because a different broker will see different things than other people see. And I just want to go over some of the things that some people aren't putting in their files. So one thing on the checklist, some people do this differently. I came from the school that you do something with every box, either say NA or check it or whatever. Other people just check the boxes that are, appropriate for the forms that they have, which is fine. One thing that's at the bottom that you should always have in here, that I don't know if it's in here and we'll go in and print it out, is the cadastral property information that you've pulled from the seller, this is a seller file. So that would include, we're not getting property profiles as much anymore, but the property record card from cadastral, the taxes, the utilities, all that information that you pulled as a listing agent. If there's a septic, if there's a well log, all that information that you used to put your listing on should be in your file. So this one's missing a few things. That there's really no reason, especially as a seller, that we're not putting these in seller files. Do we just need to shut that?
Oh, I needed to admit.
If you want to try on these pants, Hannah, they might fit you.
Oh, all right.
I'm getting rid of stuff.
Are we out of marshmallows?
Yeah.
Oh, bummer. I love marshmallows. Thank you.
They're like, brand new too.
Is that Casey?
Yeah.
Yep. Hi, Casey.
Hi, Casey. So again, it's just kind of a check sheet. Some of the things you can turn in without it, but there's some of the things we like filled in. So on this particular file of Gail's, she put that the purchase price was $718,200. There's a couple of different ways to do this too, because it was actually an $800 inspection notice thing that adjusted the price. So your commission might still be paid on what that is, and that's the commissionable price. But the purchase price was, say, $719, and then there was an $800 concession. So if we as realtors want our data to be accurate, then we as realtors have to input accurate data. So a lot of times you change or adjust the purchase price and do an amendment for that because of an inspection thing. If you do the inspection notice and send that to the title company, they should not need an amendment to adjust the purchase price, because the purchase price is actually still the same. It's still $719. You just had an $800 credit to the buyer in lieu of repairs or for repairs or whatever kind of thing. So we need to really get together as a group and talk about some of that kind of stuff of how we're doing our files so that our data is as accurate as can be. We had a meeting yesterday of the Helena multiple listing, and they're really trying to clamp down on getting our information as accurate as it can be, because a lot of times the cadastral is very inaccurate and Zillow is now using our data, which hopefully is more accurate than some of the Zestimates and stuff that they created, because they do have agents in all the markets now, so they have access to the data. So in that regard, they're going to become a little more prominent player, even though they're not doing the iBuyer stuff, but in using data that is accurate in providing these estimates and some of that. So in that regard, we have to make sure that our stuff is accurate. So, okay, on to files, closing statement. Make sure that after you close, your closing statement is in the file signed. It's okay to put one in there before everybody has signed it or as a blank one or whatever. But once you bring the check in, or once they bring the check in, it should be a signed copy. MLS sheets, make sure you go on and print out a closed one. A lot of times Tatum or Ambo or whatever will do that for us, but really, again, that's part of our job. Make sure that it's the closed one. Technically, you're supposed to have an under contract copy in the buy sell also, because what happens is if you got it under contract and something was listed on there, then somehow it changed throughout the transaction and they took out the color TV or whatever, and you have that in your buy sell, it can be very valuable. For instance, I had a deal that said there was air conditioning in the home. It wasn't air conditioning, it was a heat transfer system thing out there in Heron Creek. So we went on and changed it on the MLS that it was not an air conditioner, but the other agent had her under contract sheet that showed that it said AC unit. So I bought an AC unit. Anyway, again, it's just accuracy and it keeps you on your toes, not necessarily so you have to pay, but so that you can use it for yourself and your client going forward in the deal. Amendments. On amendments, we talked about this yesterday in the Helen and multiple listing class. Have to be specific to what you're asking for. They gave examples of lawsuits that are happening in Montana right now because people put seller to have the septic pumped. Okay, so what happens when they go and pump the septic system and the septic company says, wow, this septic tank is on its last legs and it's going to need to be replaced, or you need a new tank, or you're going to need a new drain field. And now it's a day before closing and they got the septic pump and all yours says is they're going to pump the septic. That means your buyers are now getting a nicely pumped septic system that is completely non-usable. So you have to say in there specifically how this is going to be addressed. And because they always say buyer to approve results. Well, okay, you can approve them. It doesn't say again who's paying or whatever. So it's better to put those in inspection notices versus in buy sells for one thing, because you don't often come back to the buy sell. It doesn't give you any way out, but in the inspection, it gives you a way out, at least to negotiate that. So those kind of things are on there. They also mentioned, what was the other thing they gave an example of that was similar to that? I can't remember right now. It'll come back to me. Anyway, this particular one says line 498 of the buy sell, add Nicole Johnson. So they added a buyer. It was originally just in the husband's name and they added a buyer. Those can be even more specific. I really like that she wrote the line, so you knew what line of the buy sell was being changed and how it was being changed. It's also a good idea to say, to add as another buyer. I mean, we don't have to be wordsmiths, but we want the full intent to be understood in amendments that we write. This is another amendment that she had to change the purchase price. I don't know if that was for earnest money, adding earnest money. So it doesn't tell me why. It just says line 42 to read 718 and line 44 to read 717. So they must have had $1,000 of earnest money. Closing date changed, line 54 to read honor before 11:30. Again, I would say line 54 to read closing date to be honor before, just to spell it out. So when you look at these amendments, you know exactly what it's for, and you don't have to go back to the buy sell every time and go, okay, what was line 54? What was line 44? What was line 42? That's our job, yes. But when you're flipping through amendments, you need to know, did I have that amendment to change the closing date? Did I have that amendment to add the buyer? We don't always know what it's for if it's not spelled out. Counter offer, this is a good one. Line 42, 719,000. Purchase price, 719,000. Line 44, 718,000, whatever the balance due. So that one was very nice and specific in the counter offer. Buy sells, what we're looking for in these, we don't just go to the bottom of each page and check to make sure that it's initialed. As supervising brokers, you can bring me my glasses. We're also supposed to be looking at the language that you guys are using. And that's why we have a clause library. So that if you, again, we get in trouble as realtors because we write things in and it's a lot of times too vague or a lot of times way too wordy. So we want as much as possible to be able to use the words that the lawyers have drawn up for us. So just be careful when you're adding things. Some people think window treatments is curtains. People think window treatments are blinds. So you have to sometimes specify if you're talking about window treatments being, if you want them to leave the blinds and the curtains, because the window treatments could just mean the blinds that are there and they took the curtains. So that's a thing to be wary of on personal property. Down at the bottom on lines 52 and 53 in financing, a lot of times this is where you would put in there that where they're financing or where they're getting their financing, when the letter of approval will be in there. I have a thing that I use when I write a buy sell. It's a little clause that says buyers reserve the right to obtain financing at a rate and terms acceptable to them at a bank of their choosing. They're currently working with or approved with or whatever, the bank and the person. The reason I do that is because if you change banks, technically you are supposed to amend your contract if you have written in there previously where they were financing or previously where they got their pre-approval letter. So if you put a phrase like that in that's a little more general, it allows you a little bit more of flexibility to do that, even though you are, as a buyer's agent, supposed to disclose to the seller that that is what you're doing if you're switching banks. Okay, page 2 is the closing date. Again, you want to check to make sure that that corresponds with the actual closing of the transaction or that there was amendment to change the date. Again, we're looking in there on to make sure that initials are at the bottom and that that all the blanks are filled in. I was taught when I did this to tab through. Don't just go and click to the next, because if you tab, it takes you to the next blank line. So that you have to stop at least for a second and say, do I want to add something to this? Do I want to put an NA in the box? Do I want to leave it blank? Do I need to put a date in? And I always have tried to stay in that habit of tabbing through so you don't miss something. This one has a contingent upon the sale of the buyer's home in South Jordan, Utah, to be listed within days of offer of acceptance. What you sometimes want to follow up on that on the contingency, because there is no release date, make sure that your seller is aware that this buyer has put that as a contingency and you're not closing until that house closes. There's no house to sell contingency addendum and there's no release date. So if their house takes 3 years to sell, you are now in a contract that you don't get to sell your house till theirs is sold within 3 years. So make sure those release dates are filled in. Make sure that they make that as a binding time frame. Additional provisions, there's nothing on this one, but that's another thing that we as brokers are always looking at. What kind of things are we putting in here? What are we describing? What are we asking them to pay for? What are we saying they'll pay for closing costs? Are we asking for septic pumps? Those kind of things. We want to really always be aware of additional provisions to see if there's a clause library thing that you could use better or whatever. And people can agree to anything. They can agree. We talked about non-refundable earnest money yesterday. If it's non-refundable earnest money, make sure it gets paid directly to the seller at the time, because then it doesn't become a deal later on. If financing fell through, now they want their earnest money back. And because it's still sitting at the title company. A lot of brokerages have gone to calling it a non-refundable deposit. Your earnest money might only be $500, but this non-refundable deposit becomes the property of the seller after the inspection contingency is completed, and then it gets paid directly to the seller from title at that time. That spells it out exactly when it's non-refundable, and then it gets paid to them, so that then even if the financing or something falls through, the seller ends up with that money. Also, on the buyer side, make sure that your buyer knows that they put up $50,000 in non-refundable earnest money, and even if it falls apart because of financing, they're not getting that back. So be careful on those. If you've checked something that says, like on this one on line 260, it says the water rights are being split equally between the buyer and seller, but documents prepared for the transfer will be prepared by, and that one's light blank. So if they're being split, they have to be prepared by somebody. That should either say buyer's lawyer, seller's lawyer, closing title company. In this particular case, this house is on city water, so there is no water rights. So that box didn't need to be checked. Sometimes we just go through and check things randomly because they don't know that this came from another buyer's agent. So she may have not known if it was a well or whatnot. But she also did not put in there who would be preparing those water rights documents. Okay. So those are kind of the things that we look for in files. I don't want to spend all day on every single line of a buy sell. Some things that a lot of people aren't filling out on this one, for example, this agent was not in this MLS, or they were actually Century 21. They filled out Gail's name and her license number and her phone number and her email, but they left everything with the brokerage undone. If there's a counteroffer and you're writing a counteroffer, go in and fill that out. Put those lines in and put that names in. That's your job. I've talked about this before when I do files in staff meetings. If there's a blank there, it's there for a reason in general. One exception to that is buyer's information. You don't necessarily have to put their address, state, and zip. A lot of people don't want them to know that they're buyers from California or whatever, so they don't put that in. That's not necessarily a requirement. On a listing agreement, it is a requirement. And this is the older buy sell too, so it's got some different blanks in it. Make sure that if you have a buyer and a seller, both husband and a wife, both parties are initialing and signing both parts of the contract. This one had an agreement to occupy property prior to closing. Again, make sure that that's spelled out exactly how that is happening. That one looks pretty good. Seller's property disclosures. Make sure you as a selling agent are making sure that you disclose anything that you know of that would adversely affect the property that has not been disclosed on here, and especially things like suicide happened in the front yard or some of that kind of stuff where you don't have to disclose that. But if you don't disclose it, as soon as you sell the property, the neighbor is going to come running over there and tell them, did you know their son committed suicide in the front yard, whatever it was, horrible things that may have happened. So that is, okay, here's another thing that he cited she didn't say. Mold disclosure, again, I'm mostly looking for signatures on that. This is the lead-based paint disclosure. You as the broker agent are supposed to initial that you told your sellers what to put in there. I need a sticky note on some of these. And then as the buyer's agent is supposed to check that they either received a 10-day opportunity to do the lead-based paint or they are not, they're waiving it. So this one kind of has two flags of where they initialed everything, but then they didn't check the box. Listing agreement. So in this particular one, what happened on the listing agreement was she did a really great job up here on line 118. Said even though she has the listing paperwork signed, it says property will go live on the MLS. It could say on August 1st when pictures are ready. So that's spelled out good. But in compensation, and this is getting really confusing right now with all the variable compensations and all that kind of stuff. But the first line up on top, lines 126 to 134, is how much total commission the seller is going to pay to you. And then down in these bottom, cooperation is how much you're going to pay to the other agent. So in this particular case, you put 2.5 up there and then gave 2.5 to the other agent, which means now the poor listing agent end up with zero money. So we had to go and fix that and make sure that, and of course, this was really good friends of hers, so it was easy to do. But at the end of the day, if it come down to it and you're dealing with a lawyer or something, you could maybe have to give up your entire commission. So note that that has been fixed. Here's a case where the seller husband signed on the line and the wife didn't, so that'll have to be fixed. So those are some of the kind of things we're looking for. This one doesn't have a lot of like word phrases or anything like that, wording that we can look for. Again, just make sure all the boxes are checked and lines are checked. This was a inspection notice that was written by this other person. This is an inspection notice that is my idea of overkill because it's 550,000 things written on here. On the second page, all they asked for was $800. So they wrote out all of this stuff on the first page that they found unsatisfactory and then asked for $800. Very well done, in my estimation, overkill. On the front, you can say electrical issues will be resolved. And then on the back, you can talk about what's specifically done and include the pages of the report. If there's more than one electrical issue, I don't think you have to go 361, 362, 363, 364, 365, 366, 367, 368, 369, and 3610. They're all about electrical stuff. See the inspection notice, section 3.61 to 3.610, and fix the electrical. Sometimes less is more, and sometimes you need all the details. So it's just a matter of experience and knowing your clients and being able to work together with the other agent. I mean, very, very well documented, but then to turn around and ask for $800 just seemed a little bit excessive when you have to include the pages of the inspection report anyhow. Okay, here's our earnest money receipt, not signed by the title company, but it's on title company letterhead. So that's just an oversight. Commission statements. For the most part, it says broker down here, but you as the agent are in charge of your commission. So this is where it had to be changed because it was 719 and then it went down to 718,200. Okay, they did not do an amendment, or did they do an amendment to change the purchase price on this one? So that makes that inspection notice look a little funky. Title commitments, they did that class on title commitment, and then you get to the end of the day and there is no property information. So in this particular case, this would be a red flag to me, and I missed this again as I was going through the file in Deer Lodge. Because you're the listing agent, you need to have all the information from the property in your file, because if someone comes back later and asks how you represented it and you don't even know what you represented, at the very least, you need cadastral, utilities, taxes, that kind of stuff in there. Okay. So those are some of the kind of things we looked at. So some things that, if it's a broker signature or something like that, that you need, we're going to go ahead and pay that and track down the person in the office that needs a signature. If it's something that a buyer or a seller has to sign, you're not getting paid until we see those particular documents, because once a transaction's closed, it might not have always been smooth, and we need to make sure that we can still get a hold of those buyers and sellers. Okay. Questions? Anybody? No? Okay, we're done. I don't know how to do this.